While their 5-year-old son was taking his last breath, his mother called his father 17 times, but he silenced every single
He
call.
should be arriving any
As little
minute.
Lucas died in a hospital bed, Garrett Lawson was in a
I hope
fancy
the room is
hotel
up to his
room
standards.
with another woman. He felt his phone buzz in his pocket.
Just keep
He
your
saw
eyes
his
forward,
wife's
don't look
name
down.
on the screen, and he chose
We're
to
almost
ignore
through.
her. But Garrett made a huge mistake. He forgot who his father-in-law was, a retired federal prosecutor who spent 30 years locking up
you'll find
monsters,
this confirms everything.
a man who never forgives, and a man who absolutely never
This is
forgets.
impossible.
Is there anything better than watching karma get the last laugh? If you love stories about justice, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. You are not going to want to miss how this story ends. Let's get started. The life support machine went quiet at 11:47 on a cold December night. Meredith Lawson stood frozen in the children's intensive care unit. Her hands were still wrapped around her son's tiny fingers. The warmth was already leaving his small body, disappearing like the last light of a winter day. She remembered 5 years of his laughter. She thought about the bedtime stories they whispered in the dark. She recalled his sticky kisses and the crayon drawings he proudly taped to the fridge. All of that was over now. It ended in this sterile room that smelled of chemicals and heartbreak. Lucas, her beautiful boy, had his father's dark hair and his great-grandmother's blue eyes, and now he was gone. She had seen death before. In her 11 years as an emergency room nurse, she had held the hands of strangers as they passed away. She had given terrible news to countless families. She had learned to push her own grief aside so she could do her job. But nothing in the world could have prepared her for this. Nothing can ever prepare a mother for the moment her child stops breathing. The heart monitor showed a single, flat green line. The long, steady beep cut through the sounds of the doctors trying to save him one last time. Dr. Robert Matthews, the heart specialist who had fought so hard for her son, stepped back from the bed. He looked at Meredith, and she saw the defeat in his eyes before he said a word. He spoke softly. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. I am so sorry, Meredith. We did everything we could. She knew they had. She had watched them try. She had even used her own medical skills to help. She gave her own son medication and pushed on his small chest to keep his heart going. Just standing by and doing nothing would have broken her completely. Lucas's asthma attack had quickly become a heart problem. His little heart was already weak from a condition he had for 3 years. It just could not take the strain. A nurse gently put a hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Lawson, she said, we need to prepare him now. But Meredith was stuck. She felt like she could not get any air. All she could do was look at the little face that would never smile at her again. His little chest would never rise with another breath. His favorite toy, a stuffed elephant he called Captain, was right beside him on the pillow. He could not sleep without it. She had promised him everything would be okay. She held his hand and told him his daddy was on his way. She had lied. Where was Garrett? The question cut through her shock and grief. She had tried to reach him 17 times. 17. The phone would ring and ring, then go to his voicemail. 17 times, she had begged him to please pick up, because their little boy was dying. She finally let go of Lucas's hand. Pulling her fingers away felt like tearing off her own skin. She took a step back and pulled her phone from her pocket with shaking hands. The screen showed it all, 17 calls made to Garrett. He had not answered a single one. Her nursing instincts kicked in, the part of her that always stayed calm in a crisis. She scrolled past Garrett's name and called the only other person who mattered. Her father, William Sterling, answered on the very first ring. His voice was clear and alert, even though it was the middle of the night. Honey, what is wrong? She could only say 3 words. 3 words that shattered her entire world. Lucas is gone. There was a brief silence on the other end, maybe for 2 seconds. She could almost feel him absorbing the news. She could imagine his face changing from confusion to pain, and then to the strong determination she had known her whole life. I am on my way, he said, his voice solid as a rock. Stay right where you are. I am coming. He hung up. Meredith sank into a plastic chair next to Lucas's bed. The enormous weight of her sadness finally crushed her. She did not cry, not at first. She was in a numb place beyond tears, just floating in a huge, empty space. At 2:17 in the morning, Garrett Lawson finally walked through the hospital's sliding doors. Meredith saw him before he saw her. He came down the hall with the easy confidence of a man who always gets his way. His expensive coat was lightly dusted with snow, and his fancy leather shoes made clicking sounds on the clean floor. But something was off. The shirt under his coat was slightly wrinkled. His hair was messy, but not from rushing to the hospital. And when he finally noticed her sitting alone in the hallway, his face showed a look of concern that seemed to appear just a little too late. Meredith, he said, his voice perfectly smooth. He was a man who had faked being sincere so many times. It was almost impossible to tell the difference. What is going on? My phone died. I just saw your messages. I got here as fast as I could. She simply looked up at him. This was the man she had married 6 years ago in a beautiful garden. This was the man she had built a life with, a home with, a son with. This was the man who was not there when that son died. Lucas is dead, she said, her voice completely empty of emotion. Garrett's face quickly changed, but his reactions did not seem right. There was shock, but it came a second too late. There was sadness, but it felt thin. There was horror, but it seemed like a performance. Everything was just a little bit wrong, like an actor who had not memorized his lines. What? No, that cannot be right. When did it happen? How? 3 hours ago, his heart gave out. The asthma attack made his heart stop. They tried to save him for 45 minutes. He sat down hard in the chair beside her. The plastic groaned under his weight. I am so sorry. I should have been here. Yes, she said, you should have. Then they both heard footsteps coming down the hall. They were steady, deliberate, and very familiar. Meredith turned to see her father walking toward them. William Sterling was 68 years old, with thick silver hair and a face lined from a long life. He was retired from a long career as a federal prosecutor, where he had spent 30 years putting evil men in prison. He moved a little slower these days, but his eyes were as sharp as they had ever been. And when he looked at Garrett, a dangerous fire lit up in his eyes. William did not say a word. He just glanced at Garrett's wrinkled shirt collar. Then his eyes locked onto a tiny smudge of lipstick on his cuff that Garrett had not even noticed. He could smell the man's guilt like it was cheap perfume. He walked past Garrett and pulled his daughter into a hug. He just held her as she finally started to cry. Garrett watched them, his own face a careful, blank mask. He had never liked his father-in-law. He is too suspicious, he always complained. He is always trying to control things. He does not trust me. It turns out William had every reason not to. But Garrett had no idea that his life was about to become a living nightmare. He did not know that the man holding his grieving wife was already thinking, already planning. He was already getting ready to destroy everything Garrett had ever built. A war started that night in the brightly lit hallway of a hospital over the body of a 5-year-old boy who deserved a much better father. The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday morning. The sky was full of dark clouds that looked like they might release snow or just more sadness. St. Michael's Church was filled with people. There were Meredith's co-workers from the hospital, neighbors from their wealthy community, and Garrett's business partners in their dark, expensive suits. The small white coffin sat at the front of the church, covered in white roses. It seemed so tiny in the huge, quiet space. Meredith stood between her father and her husband, wearing black. Her face was a tight mask of sadness. She had not slept in 4 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas's face. Every time the house was quiet, she heard the sound of the heart monitor's flat line. Garrett played the role of the heartbroken father perfectly. He shook people's hands and accepted their sympathy with eyes that looked perfectly sad. He gave a speech about his son that made strangers cry, his voice breaking at all the right moments. His sadness seemed carefully planned for everyone to see. Lucas loved dinosaurs, Garrett said from the front of the church, his voice thick with fake sadness. He would run around the house for hours making roaring sounds, pretending he was a giant T-Rex. And every single night, he would look up at me with those big blue eyes of his and say, "I love you, Daddy." As Meredith listened to him speak, she wondered if a single word was true. Had Garrett ever really looked at their son? Or was Lucas just another perfect accessory for his perfect life? During the funeral service, she watched Garrett glance at his watch, not once, but twice. She saw him look at a text message and almost smile before remembering where he was. At the cemetery, snow began to fall, dusting the small casket as it was lowered into the frozen ground. Meredith's hand trembled as she dropped a single white rose into the grave. "Goodbye, my sweet boy," she whispered. "Mommy will love you forever." Garrett stood beside her, placing an arm around her waist that felt more like a prop for a photograph than a gesture of comfort. The moment the service ended, he checked his watch again. Later, back at their townhouse on Beacon Hill, friends and family filled the elegant rooms. Their quiet conversations and the catered food were meant to be comforting. But Meredith moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting hugs she could not feel and answering questions she could not hear. Her best friend from college, Brooke Chambers, found her in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window at the snow. "How are you holding up?" Brooke asked softly, her voice full of concern. She was a beautiful woman of 33, with kind eyes and warm auburn hair. For 15 years, she had been the one person, besides Meredith's father, William, whom Meredith trusted completely. "I do not know how to answer that," Meredith said. "I feel like someone scooped everything out from inside of me and just left an empty shell." Brooke wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulder. "Whatever you need, I am here, day or night. You know that, right?" "I do." Eventually, the last guest departed. The caterers packed up and left. A heavy silence fell over the house. Garrett loosened his tie and reached for his overcoat. "I have to go to the office," he announced, already heading for the door. "A big deal is about to close, and I have to be there." Meredith could only stare at him, stunned. "We just buried our son, Garrett." "And this is how I am handling it," he shot back, "by working." He slipped on his expensive cashmere coat, adjusting the collar in the hall mirror. "I will be home very late. Do not wait up." He was gone before she could say another word. In that silent moment, something inside Meredith finally broke. It was a small, quiet crack, like the first split in a sheet of ice. There were no tears. There was no shouting. Instead, a cold sense of purpose washed over her. She grabbed her own coat and followed him. Garrett's Mercedes pulled smoothly out of the driveway, heading toward downtown Boston. Meredith kept a safe distance behind him in her own car, her heart pounding in her chest. She expected him to drive to the financial district, to the tall, gleaming building where his company, Whitmore Capital, was located, but he did not. Instead, he drove toward the harbor, toward the luxurious Pemberton Hotel. Meredith found a parking spot across the street and just watched. She saw him hand his keys to the valet. She saw him stroll through the hotel's grand entrance with the confidence of a man who had been there many times before. She waited 5 minutes, then got out of her car and walked into the hotel. The man at the front desk barely noticed her. In her dark funeral dress, she was invisible. Just another sad person, seeking a quiet corner. She picked a small table in the hotel bar with a clear view of the elevators. At 7:43, the elevator doors opened, and Garrett stepped out with a woman. She was petite and fashionable, likely in her early 30s. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her dress was obviously designer, and her jewelry was tasteful and expensive. She held on to Garrett's arm with a casual intimacy that spoke volumes. They stopped near the elevators, and Garrett leaned in to whisper something in her ear. The woman laughed, a bright, clear sound that cut through the quiet lobby. Meredith raised her phone and started taking pictures. 1, 2, 3. Each soft click of the camera felt like a small act of justice. The woman gave Garrett a quick kiss on the cheek, then stepped back into an elevator alone. Garrett stood there for a moment, a small smile on his face as he watched the doors close. Then he turned and walked into the hotel restaurant, probably for the business meeting he had invented. Meredith sat at her table for 20 more minutes. Her hands were steady as she held a glass of water she did not drink. The tiny crack inside her had shattered completely. In its place, something new was flooding in, a feeling she had not felt in years. It was rage, but it was not a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, methodical rage, the kind of rage that waits, that watches, and that makes very careful plans. As she drove home, through the falling snow, the photos on her phone felt like evidence of a terrible crime. And it was a crime, she realized. A crime against her heart. A betrayal so deep, it made everything else in her life seem small. When she walked through her front door, she found her father, William, waiting in the living room. "Where have you been?" he asked. Then he saw the look on her face. "You followed him." His eyes narrowed. "What did you find?" Meredith did not say a word. She just handed him her phone with the pictures on the screen. William swiped through each photo, his expression growing colder and harder with each one. "How long have you suspected?" he asked. "For months, I think. Maybe longer. I told myself I was just being paranoid." She sank onto the couch, feeling a deep wave of exhaustion. "I was so stupid." "No," William said, sitting beside her, his voice firm. "He made you feel that way. That is what men like him do. They make you think you are crazy for trusting your own instincts." "What do I do now?" William was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was as cold as the winter night. "Now, we find out exactly who your husband is, and then we will make him pay." 3 days after the funeral, Meredith sat at her father's kitchen table in Cambridge. She was surrounded by papers that laid out her entire marriage in cold numbers and shocking lies. William had been busy making calls. He had contacted old friends from his days as a prosecutor, people who owed him favors. They were experts at digging up secrets that powerful men tried to bury. A forensic accountant named Margaret Foster had worked for 2 straight days, carefully untangling the web of Garrett Lawson's secret financial life. What she found made Meredith feel physically ill. "He forged your signature," Margaret said, placing documents on the table, like a surgeon laying out her instruments. "And it was not just once. It was not just for the deed to your house." She laid out stack after stack of paper. "Here are 3 loan applications, totaling more than $200,000. Here is a second mortgage on the townhouse. And here are credit cards opened in your name, with a combined balance of $93,000. Meredith just stared at the papers. She saw her own signature, flawlessly forged, on documents she had never laid eyes on. Her social security number, her employment information, all used without her knowledge. How is that possible? I would have seen the bills. He opened a secret post office box, Margaret explained. It was in Somerville. All the statements went there, so you would never see them. William's jaw was tight with fury. There is more, Margaret said. She opened another file, this one filled with documents marked with red flags. These are insurance policies, health and life insurance for your family. She pointed to a single line. Garrett allowed Lucas's health insurance to lapse 4 months ago. He just stopped paying the premiums. He needed the money to cover his gambling debts. The room started to spin around Meredith. She gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. Gambling? Online poker, sports betting, horse races. Margaret's voice was gentle, but her words were like daggers. From what we have found, Garrett Lawson owes at least $300,000 to various bookies and gambling websites. I never knew. He never mentioned it. I never saw any sign. They get very good at hiding it, Margaret said, especially men from wealthy families with an image to protect. They use secret email addresses, burner phones, sometimes entire secret lives. Meredith looked at her father, her eyes burning with tears that she refused to let fall. Lucas had no insurance when he died. He died because his father had a gambling problem. William nodded slowly, his face like a mask of stone. The night Lucas died, about 3 hours before Garrett met his mistress, he was at a casino in Atlantic City. He bought $12,000 worth of chips. He lost every last cent at the blackjack table. Then he drove back to Boston, met that woman at the Pemberton Hotel, and turned off his phone. A heavy, absolute silence filled the room after he finished speaking. Meredith shot to her feet, the chair legs screaming against the hardwood floor. She walked to the window and stared out at the quiet Cambridge street. Snow dusted the trees, and the world outside carried on with a perfectly normal day. I want him in prison, she said. Her voice was completely steady, as cold as the wind whipping outside. I want his mother's accounts frozen. I want his mistress's life ruined. I want every single person who helped him hide this to lose everything they have. William rose and came to stand beside her. Then we will do this the right way. We cannot let emotion guide us now. This must be pure strategy and cold, hard planning. Meredith turned from the window and finally looked at him. Who is she? The other woman. Her name is Sloane Whitmore. She is 31 years old. She works as a senior analyst at Whitmore Capital. Her father is Marcus Whitmore, the man who started the company, the founder's daughter. Meredith let out a laugh that had no humor in it. Of course, Garrett always had very expensive taste. There is something else you should know, William added with care. Sloane was not the only one. I found 3 other women. There was Nicole Brennan in 2016, Cassandra Wells in 2019, and another woman who refused to give us her name. Eleanor Lawson paid all of them. They had to sign agreements promising they would never talk about what happened. And then they disappeared. Meredith took in this new information. It was another layer on top of a mountain of betrayal. 3 other women came before the mistress. 3 women were paid to be quiet. Garrett had ruined their lives, and his mother simply wrote a check to make the problem go away. I need to speak with them, she said. I want to talk to Nicole and Cassandra. I need to hear their stories from them. I can arrange that. A soft knock on the kitchen door broke their conversation. William's housekeeper was standing in the doorway. Mr. Sterling, there is a woman here asking for Mrs. Lawson. She says her name is Brooke Chambers. Meredith felt a sudden wave of relief. It was Brooke, her very best friend. She was the one person in the entire world that Meredith knew she could always trust. Please, Let her in." A few moments later, Brooke entered the room, her face full of concern. She walked directly to Meredith and pulled her into a long, tight hug. "I came as soon as I heard," Brooke said. "I have been so worried about you. You have not answered any of my phone calls. I have been a little busy." Brooke's eyes moved around the room. She saw the stacks of documents on the table, the piles of folders, and the serious expression on William's face. "What is all this?" "This is evidence," Meredith answered, "against Garrett." "Evidence of what?" So, Meredith told her everything. She explained the affair, the gambling problems, the fake documents, and the insurance policy he had canceled. She did not leave a single detail out. Brooke listened to the whole story, a look of complete horror on her face. Her hand went to her mouth, and her eyes grew wide with shock. "Oh my goodness," she whispered when Meredith finished. "Meredith, I never knew. I'm so very sorry." "Nobody knew," Meredith told her. "He was very good at keeping secrets. What are you going to do now?" Meredith looked at her father, then turned back to her best friend. "We are going to destroy him." Brooke nodded slowly, her face becoming firm and determined. "Whatever you need from me, I will be right here with you. Always." That night, long after Brooke left, Meredith was lying wide awake in her father's guest room. She could not stop replaying their conversation in her mind. She was searching for the one thing that did not feel right. It was not something she could put her finger on. It was just a weird flash in Brooke's eyes when Meredith mentioned the evidence. There was a tiny hesitation before Brooke said all the right things. Meredith told herself she was imagining it. Brooke was her best friend, after all. She was the person she trusted more than anyone. Brooke was the one person who would never, ever betray her. Meredith closed her eyes, wishing that sleep would finally come. She pushed the doubt out of her mind, having no idea just how wrong she was. 2 weeks had gone by since the funeral. For the first time since she followed Garrett to that hotel, Meredith went back to their townhouse on Beacon Hill. She had been staying at her father's home in Cambridge, gathering evidence and making a plan. She was putting together a legal case so powerful that not even Eleanor Lawson's money could stop it. But tonight, she was there for a very specific reason. She needed certain documents from the house. She needed Garrett's private files and the financial records he thought were safely hidden in a secret safe behind a painting in his office. She knew the combination to the safe. She had known it for years. Garrett told it to her early in their marriage. That was back when he believed she was too simple to understand what the documents really meant. He had never bothered to change the code. The house was completely dark when she arrived. Garrett's Mercedes was not in the driveway. She used her own key to unlock the door and moved like a ghost through the halls she once called home. Everything she saw sparked a memory. She noticed Lucas's small handprints on the window pane. His toy dinosaurs were still scattered around the living room. His little rain boots were sitting by the front door. They were waiting for his small feet, but he was never going to wear them again. Meredith shook the thought from her head and forced herself to focus. She could not allow herself to get lost in grief right now. The study appeared exactly as she remembered. It had the same leather armchairs and the large mahogany desk. The old oil painting hung above the fireplace, concealing the wall safe. She swung the painting aside and entered the numbers. The safe opened with a quiet click. Inside, she discovered stacks of papers, bank statements, and investment records. A folder marked with the word "personal" made her heart beat faster. She worked quickly, carefully placing everything into her large tote bag. She was so focused on her task that she did not hear the front door creak open. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" a voice demanded. She spun around and saw Garrett standing in the doorway of the study. His face was a mask of absolute fury. From the shadows behind him, his mother, Eleanor Lawson, appeared. Meredith had always been afraid of Eleanor. At 67 years old, Garrett's mother had an aura of power that came from generations of Boston money. Her silver hair was perfectly in place. Her expensive suit was without a single wrinkle. Her eyes were as cold as ice. "We had a feeling you might come here," Eleanor said, her voice chillingly calm. "I told Garrett you would likely try to get this evidence. Grief makes people predictable." Garrett stormed across the room and ripped the bag from Meredith's shoulder. He flipped it over, dumping all the contents onto his desk. He pushed the papers around with angry, frantic hands. "Are you looking for something specific?" he asked. His voice dripped with contempt. "Maybe some bank statements? Proof of my affairs? Evidence that I am not the perfect husband you told everyone I was?" "You let our son die," Meredith said back. Her voice was strong, even though her heart was pounding inside her chest. "You canceled his insurance policy. You gambled away the money for his medical care. Lucas died without insurance because of you." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Lucas died because he was sick," he snarled. "He was always sick. He died because you insisted on keeping him at home. You should have sent him to a special facility where professionals could have cared for him." The cruelty in his words felt like a physical blow. "You cannot really believe that," she whispered. "What I believe," Garrett said, stepping closer to her, "is that you are an emotional woman. You cannot accept that sometimes children get sick and die. So instead of grieving like a normal person, you have to find someone to blame. You are just looking for a person to punish." Eleanor walked over to stand beside her son. They were a united front against their common problem. "Meredith, my dear, I know you are in pain. We are all in pain. Lucas was my grandson, after all. But this—" She waved a hand at the scattered documents on the desk. "This is not the way. It will not bring him back. It will only destroy what little is left of this family." "There is no family left to destroy," Meredith said. "There is only me and him and the truth of what he did." Eleanor's friendly expression hardened into stone. "The truth is whatever we say it is. And I have more than enough money and power to make sure my version is the only one people ever hear." She pulled a folder from her designer handbag and set it on the desk. "Everything is in Garrett's name now," Eleanor announced. "The house, the stock portfolio, the retirement funds, all of it. You signed the documents to transfer everything over 18 months ago. I have the original copies, all legally witnessed and signed by a notary." A cold feeling of dread washed over Meredith. "I never signed any papers like that." "Of course you did," Eleanor said with a terrifying smile. "You were exhausted from working a double shift at the hospital. Lucas had been sick all week. Garrett brought home some papers. He told you they were just routine updates for your will and finances, and you signed them without reading a single word. It happens more often than you might think." Suddenly, Meredith remembered that night. She remembered feeling so tired she could barely stand. She remembered the stack of papers. She remembered Garrett's calm voice saying, "Just sign here, and one last one here." "You forged my signature," Meredith accused. "I did nothing of the sort. Your signature is on every page. Any judge in this country will confirm they are legal." Eleanor leaned closer. Her expensive perfume was overwhelming. Her smile was like the sharp edge of a knife. "If you try to divorce my son, you will walk away with absolutely nothing. You will be left with only debt and the memory of your son. But if you decide to fight us, we will destroy you. We will have your nursing license revoked. Your credit will be ruined. Your good name will be dragged through the mud." She stopped for a beat. "And so will your father's." Meredith felt her veins fill with ice. "What on earth does my father have to do with this?" William Sterling spent a very long time as a prosecutor. For 30 years, he put criminals in jail. Some of those cases, Eleanor tilted her head, were not exactly by the book. "I have documents. I have witnesses ready to speak. I have proof that could reopen those investigations. It would destroy careers. It could send an old man to prison for abusing his power as a prosecutor." "You are bluffing," Meredith managed to say. "Am I really?" Eleanor straightened her suit jacket. "You are welcome to find out. But I am giving you my word, Meredith. If you continue down this path, you will lose everything. And your father will take his last breath in a prison cell." She turned and walked toward the door, then paused. "Go home. Grieve for your son. Accept the money we are offering you, and build a new life for yourself." Her voice suddenly became gentle, almost motherly. "It is honestly the most sensible choice you can make." And then she was gone. Garrett followed her out without another word. Meredith stood all alone in the study. She was surrounded by all the evidence she had gathered, evidence that now felt utterly worthless. Her hands started to shake, and her heart began to race. But somewhere, deep down, beneath the terror, another feeling started to rise. They had completely underestimated her. They assumed she would break. They were certain their threats would send her running for cover. They were wrong. 3 weeks after the funeral, Meredith met with Nicole Brennan. They found a small coffee shop in Hartford, Connecticut, far away from the painful memories of Boston. Nicole, now 35, was a quiet woman with tired eyes. Her expression revealed a person who had learned life's lessons the hard way. She was just 27 when Garrett first targeted her. At the time, she was young and ambitious, trying to build a career in the male-dominated world of finance. "He made me feel like I was the most special person in the world," Nicole said. Her hands were wrapped around a tea mug she hadn't touched. "He acted like I was the only one who truly understood him. He claimed his marriage was a sham. He swore he was going to leave his wife, and that he and I would build a future." "For how long did that go on?" Meredith asked. 8 months, Nicole answered with a bitter laugh. "It continued until I discovered 2 other women he was also seeing. I was so naive. I actually thought I meant something to him. I believed what we had was real." "What happened when you tried to break it off?" Nicole's expression turned dark. "He promised to destroy my career. He swore he would make sure I never worked in finance again. He threatened to spread rumors that I was emotionally unstable, that I was the one who pursued him, and that I was a liability to any company that might hire me. Then his mother, Eleanor, offered me $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. I was so scared. I felt like I had no other option." Nicole finally looked up, her eyes meeting Meredith's. "I have regretted it every single day since." Meredith reached across the table and placed a hand on Nicole's. "Did you keep anything? Any evidence at all?" Nicole was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out a tiny flash drive. "I kept everything," she said quietly. "Emails, text messages, photos, even some financial records. Garrett stupidly showed me when he was trying to impress me." She pressed the small drive into Meredith's palm. "For 8 years, I have prayed that someone with enough courage could finally use this." The contents of Nicole's flash drive changed everything. When Meredith combined it with the evidence Margaret Foster had already uncovered, it painted a devastating picture of Garrett Lawson's criminal behavior. It showed evidence of forgery, fraud, and even money laundering that was funneled through Eleanor's hidden overseas bank accounts. The proof revealed a pattern of tax evasion and predatory behavior that stretched back nearly 10 years. Meredith brought all of her findings to the district attorney's office. Richard Sullivan, the prosecutor assigned to her case, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s. He had a reputation for taking down powerful white-collar criminals. "This is quite powerful," Sullivan commented, as he reviewed the documents on his desk. "The forgery charges alone could put him away for years. When you factor in the financial crimes, the pattern of harassment, and the testimony of other victims, he looked up at Meredith. We can certainly build a strong case. For the first time since Lucas had died, Meredith felt a tiny flicker of hope. She called Brooke to share the good news, and they agreed to meet at a wine bar in their old neighborhood. Brooke reacted with the perfect amount of enthusiasm as she listened. She posed intelligent questions about the proof, the legal timeline, and the prosecutor's strategy. "This is fantastic," Brooke said, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze Meredith's. "He is finally going to pay for what he did." Meredith answered, "I could never have done this without your help. You were my rock." Brooke smiled warmly. "That's what friends do for each other." For the first time in what felt like forever, a genuine smile appeared on Meredith's face. She leaned in and told her friend, "I located another victim, Brooke. Her name is Cassandra Wells." Meredith went on to explain that Cassandra possessed original documents with Garrett's own signature on them. It was concrete evidence that would be impossible to challenge in court. Brooke's eyes widened in surprise. "That is amazing," she said. "Where is she now?" "She's living in Cambridge. I am going to see her tomorrow." A shadow of worry seemed to cross Brooke's face. "Please be careful," she cautioned. "Eleanor has eyes and ears everywhere. She could try to get to Cassandra before you do." "I will," Meredith promised. But when she got to Cassandra Wells's apartment the following day, she was already too late. The apartment was completely bare. According to the landlord, Cassandra had packed all her things and left early that same morning. She did not leave a forwarding address or give any explanation for her quick departure. She had just disappeared into thin air. 3 days after that, Meredith got news that shattered her world. Richard Sullivan, her attorney, asked her to come to his office. His expression was serious. "We have a major setback," he told her. "The evidence provided by your father's sources has been disqualified. A judge ruled that it had been obtained improperly." Without that proof, their case was incredibly fragile. Meredith felt the blood rush from her head. "What was the judge's name?" she asked. He replied, "Judge Richard Blackwell." The name struck Meredith like a physical blow. Blackwell was one of Eleanor's most trusted friends. He was a man who had been a dinner guest at the Lawson home for decades. "There is more," Sullivan said, with some hesitation. "Garrett has filed a lawsuit against you. He's claiming you are mentally unstable due to your grief. He was also attempting to get a restraining order against her, and he had a witness to back up his story." "A witness to what?" Meredith asked, confused. Sullivan pushed a document across the desk toward her. It was a formal, sworn statement. It alleged that Meredith had made threats to kill Garrett. At the very bottom of the page was a signature, Brooke Chambers. The room seemed to spin around her. Meredith gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling as her eyesight went blurry. Brooke, her closest friend for 15 years. The single person she had confided in with her deepest secrets and worries. She had been working for Eleanor all along. "I never threatened anyone," Meredith said, her voice just a faint whisper. "Brooke is making it up. She is lying." "I know you didn't," Sullivan said gently, "but this makes our situation far more difficult." That evening, Meredith drove to Brooke's apartment to face her. She didn't ring the bell. She used the extra key Brooke had insisted she keep years ago. She entered and went straight into the living room. Brooke was on the couch, holding a glass of wine. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. "How long?" Meredith demanded. Brooke did not try to act confused. 3 years, she confessed. "Why?" "Eleanor pays for my mother's care at a nursing home. I couldn't afford it on my own." Brooke began to sob uncontrollably. "I never thought it would get this bad. I never imagined—" Her voice faded away. "Meredith, I am so sorry. I never—" ever wanted to hurt you. My son is gone, Meredith stated, her voice flat and empty, and you helped the man who allowed him to die. I know, Brooke wept, reaching out for her. Please, you must understand. Stay out of my life. Meredith's tone was as frigid as a winter night. And you can tell Eleanor that this is not over. She spun around and walked out into the chilly evening air. She was completely on her own, betrayed by her closest friend, and her legal case was destroyed. But she was not defeated. Not yet. The first major blow landed 2 days after she discovered Brooke's betrayal. Meredith was sitting at her father's kitchen table, looking into a cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched. The doorbell rang. Her father, William, went to answer it. He came back holding a large manila envelope. It bore the official seal of the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Nursing. She knew exactly what it was before she even tore it open. Anonymous complaints had been filed against her. They made accusations of patient neglect, emotional instability, and even stealing medication. Every false allegation was laid out in great detail, complete with specific dates and incident numbers, for events that had never occurred. Her nursing license was being suspended during the investigation. She was legally barred from working as a nurse until the entire situation was resolved. This is Eleanor's doing, William said, his voice grim as he read the letter over her shoulder. She is systematically trying to take apart every single piece of your life, your career, your friendships, your reputation. And just like that, her career was gone. Meredith stared down at her own hands. For 11 years, these hands had saved lives. These were the same hands that held her son as he took his last breath. But now, they were not even allowed to touch a patient. What am I going to do? She whispered. We will fight, he answered. We will prove every one of these complaints is a lie. But as he spoke, Meredith saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. Eleanor had too much money and too many powerful friends. They stood no chance against her connections. She could only think of all the patients she would never get to help. She thought about her colleagues, who would surely hear the horrible rumors and start to question her. An entire career, built over 11 years, had vanished in a moment. It was all destroyed by a woman who had never worked a day in her life. That night, Garrett sent flowers to her father's house. They were white lilies, the kind you see at a funeral. The card simply said, "Thinking of you during this difficult time." Meredith dumped them directly into the trash can. A week later, the second disaster arrived. For several days, she had been feeling off. She was sick every morning and felt a deep exhaustion that grief alone could not explain. She tried to convince herself it was just the stress. She told herself anything, but the one thing she was too terrified to admit. But the body never lies. She found herself sitting on the cold bathroom floor at 6 in the morning, staring at a positive pregnancy test. She was 8 weeks along. The baby had been conceived before Lucas passed away, before she learned the truth about Garrett, before her whole world had shattered. She was pregnant with Garrett's child. There was no escaping him now. She placed a hand on her stomach and felt a wave of pure terror. How could she possibly bring a child into this nightmare? How could she look at this baby every day and not see Garrett's cruel eyes staring back at her? She told only her father, William. "This changes absolutely everything," he said quietly, as they sat together at the kitchen table. "You must know that Garrett will use this child against you." "I know," she answered. "So, what do you want to do?" Meredith gazed out the window at the bleak February sky. What did she want? She wanted her son, Lucas, back. She wanted to wake up and discover the last 3 months were nothing but a terrible dream. But wishes do not change reality. "I want to keep the baby," she said at last. I cannot punish a child for what Garrett did. William nodded his head slowly. Then we will face this together. He was right about Garrett. A few days later, his lawyers filed a petition for custody of the unborn baby. Their argument was vicious. They claimed Meredith was mentally unstable, using the nursing board's complaints as their proof. They emphasized that she was unemployed and living with her elderly father. Garrett, on the other hand, was a successful businessman who could offer a secure and stable home. The family court judge, who happened to be another one of Eleanor's friends, gave Garrett visitation rights. He would be allowed to see the child 3 days a week, starting from the day it was born. He would also have a say in every major decision. He would be stuck in her life forever. After the hearing, Meredith sat alone in the courthouse hallway. She pressed her hands against her stomach as the trap finally became clear. She could not run away. She could not hide. She was now connected to Garrett Lawson for the next 18 years. Trapped by the law, trapped by blood, and trapped by the new life growing inside of her. The third disaster happened 3 weeks later. Meredith was in the kitchen making tea when she heard a loud crash. It was a heavy thud, like a body hitting the floor, followed by a choked gasp, and then a terrifying silence. She sprinted into the living room. William was on the floor next to his favorite armchair. His face was a pale shade of gray, and his hand was clutched to his chest. His eyes were wide with a look of agony and fear. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. "Dad!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Her nursing training kicked in, even as panic washed over her. "Look at me. Please stay with me," she pleaded, her hands trembling as she dialed 911. She fought to keep her voice steady. She knew exactly what was happening. He was having a massive heart attack. The ambulance showed up in 7 minutes. Meredith rode with her father to the hospital, tightly holding his hand the whole time. She promised him he would be okay. She told him how much she needed him. She begged him not to leave her all by herself. The doctors rushed him into an emergency operation. The hours passed by slowly as Meredith sat in the waiting room, pregnant and terrified. She prayed to a God she had stopped believing in. He survived the surgery, but the man who woke up 3 days later was not the same strong father who had promised to help her fight. William was fragile now, just a shadow of the man he once was. His voice was weak, and his movements were slow. The long battle had already stolen years from his life. The heart attack had taken what little strength he had left. "I am so sorry," he whispered, as she sat by his hospital bed, holding his frail hand. "I brought all of this on you. That old case, the shortcuts I took 30 years ago. And now it is destroying you." "Did you fake the evidence?" she asked him. "No," he said, shutting his eyes. "But I did not push back hard enough when they buried key information. I let them do it because I was so sure the man was guilty." A single tear traced a path down his wrinkled cheek. And that was all they needed to twist the truth. Meredith looked at her father, the man who had always been her protector, her rock. He was now old and broken, too weak to finish the fight he started. She was now truly and completely alone. That night, she sat in Lucas's empty room, clutching his favorite stuffed animal, Captain the elephant. She whispered to her son in the darkness, "I tried, my sweet boy. I really tried. But they have everything. They have the money, the power, and even the judges. They have turned all my friends against me." She buried her face in the soft toy, trying to breathe in the last faint scent of Lucas that lingered there. What am I supposed to do now? The house was deathly quiet. Her father was in the hospital. Garrett was walking free. Eleanor had won. Everything she had been fighting for was gone. But just when despair was about to consume her, something else began to stir deep inside. It was not the baby. It was something older and much stronger, It was the one part of her that refused to be broken, even after everything else had been stripped away. If she could not beat them in a courtroom, she would beat them in the court of public opinion. If she could not defeat them with evidence, she would defeat them with the truth. If she could not win with power, she would have to find a new way. She realized the only path to victory was to expose him, but she could not do it on her own. She needed a partner, someone already deep inside Garrett's world, someone who knew all of his secrets, and someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. She needed to find his mistress. Finding Sloane Whitmore was the easy part, but gathering the courage to actually confront her was another challenge entirely. Meredith stood outside the Whitmore Capitol building on a freezing February night. Her breath turned to smoke in the cold air, and her hands were shoved deep into her coat pockets. She was 5 months pregnant, her small belly just starting to show. The baby gave a gentle kick. It was a little reminder that life keeps going, even after your world has been completely shattered. Sloane emerged from the building at 6:45. Her blonde hair gleamed under the streetlights, her expensive coat was immaculate, and her makeup was perfect. She was everything Meredith was not, put together, confident, and seemingly untouched by suffering. Meredith moved to stand directly in her path. Sloane paused, a flash of recognition in her eyes. "Mrs. Lawson, I need to talk to you. I have nothing to discuss with you." "Then you are just going to listen," Meredith replied, pulling a thick folder from her bag. "I know all about Nicole Brennan. I know about Cassandra Vanderwall. I even know about the other woman who was too scared to give her name. That makes 3 women before you. 3 women Garrett promised the exact same things he is now promising you. And 3 women that his mother, Eleanor, paid a lot of money to make them disappear." Sloane's face hardened into a mask. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "Yes, you do," Meredith pressed on. She opened the folder, revealing photos, legal documents, and written statements. Nicole was 27. He told her his marriage was only for appearances. He swore they would build a real life together. 8 months later, he threatened to destroy her career if she did not vanish. That is a lie. Cassandra was only 25 years old. It was the same script, the same promises, and the same threats when she started causing problems for him. Meredith looked straight into Sloane's eyes. "You are not special. You are not different from the rest of us. You are just the next woman in a very long line." A tiny crack appeared in Sloane's perfect image, just big enough for Meredith to see the fear hiding beneath. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you were with him the night my son died. You heard his phone ringing. You watched him ignore my calls. I called him 17 times. 17. And he chose to stay with you instead of coming to help his dying child." Sloane's face turned completely white. "He told me you were just being dramatic. He made it sound like your son was always getting sick, and you were just being dramatic." "Lucas passed away at 11:47 that night. He died while Garrett was in your bed. He died as I held his tiny hand, telling him his daddy would be there any minute." Meredith's voice finally cracked with emotion. "Did he mention that part? Did he tell you that our 5-year-old boy's last words were to ask for his father?" Sloane began to tremble, her perfectly calm appearance shattering completely. "No," she whispered. "He never told me that. Of course he did not. That is because, to him, you are not a real person. You are just a temporary escape. And the moment you cause a problem, if you get pregnant, or want something more, or endanger his perfect reputation, Eleanor will appear and try to pay you to go away, if you are fortunate. I am not the same as those other women." "That is what every single one of them believed," Meredith responded. She pressed the folder into Sloane's hands. "You need to read every last page. Then you have to decide if you really want to protect a man who allowed his own son to die. Meredith then turned around and started walking away. She left Sloane standing there on the sidewalk, holding the folder tightly to her chest as her entire world began to crumble around her. 3 days later, Meredith's phone buzzed. "I read all of it," Sloane said, her voice sounding completely defeated. "I confronted Garrett about it. He did not even try to deny it. He just gave me a smile and said I ought to feel grateful that he picked me." "So, what are you going to do?" Meredith asked. A long, quiet moment passed over the phone. Then, in a very soft voice, Sloane asked, "What is it that you want from me?" "Testify," Meredith said plainly. "Tell the world what you witnessed that evening. Tell them about Garrett's words and how he ignored my calls." "Eleanor will ruin me. My father's business will be destroyed." "Eleanor is planning to ruin you regardless of what you do," Meredith told her. "Your only real choice is whether you are remembered as his victim or as his accomplice." Another long pause followed. Meredith could hear Sloane's breathing, sensing the intense internal battle she was facing. "All right," Sloane said at last. "I will testify." With Sloane's cooperation, the district attorney was able to reopen the case. This time, they possessed a witness who had direct knowledge of the events, someone with no motive to invent a story, someone who had seen Garrett's heartlessness firsthand. Their attorney, Richard Sullivan, asked Meredith to come to his office. His voice was filled with cautious optimism. "This changes the entire situation," he said. "Sloane's testimony supports every part of your account. The district attorney is moving forward with charges." For one brilliant, hopeful instant, Meredith allowed herself to believe. Garrett was taken into custody at his office the following week. Meredith observed from the other side of the street as officers escorted him from the building in handcuffs. He was led past the colleagues who had once looked up to him, past the young assistants who had been intimidated by him, and past the security team who had always shown him deference. His face was a blank mask, but Meredith could see the absolute panic in his eyes. It felt like a real victory. But she should have realized it was far from over. She should have realized that Eleanor Lawson would never surrender without using every weapon at her disposal. The most difficult part was about to begin. Eleanor Lawson announced a press conference. It took place on the steps of the Massachusetts State House. Meredith viewed it on television from the comfort of her father's living room. Her father, William, was beside her, his hand shaking as it held hers. The local news channel switched to a live broadcast. A swarm of reporters with cameras gathered around the silver-haired matriarch of one of Boston's most influential families. "I am addressing you today," Eleanor started, her voice confident and clear, "because my family has become the subject of a vicious campaign founded on complete falsehoods." She raised a folder filled with documents for the cameras to capture. 27 years ago, William Sterling, who at the time was a federal prosecutor, wrongfully imprisoned an innocent man. Thomas Whitfield spent 8 years behind bars for a murder he had nothing to do with. His conviction was secured with evidence that William Sterling was aware was fabricated. Meredith felt her father stiffen next to her. "I possess statements right in this folder from witnesses who were never allowed to speak, and documentation of evidence that was deliberately hidden. This was part of a corrupt practice that destroyed an innocent man's existence." The reporters immediately began to yell their questions. Eleanor held up a hand to quiet them. "William Sterling's daughter, Meredith Lawson, is now targeting my son as an act of pure vengeance. She has manufactured evidence, she has paid off witnesses, and she has invented this whole narrative because she is unable to accept the reality of her own child's death." Meredith felt as though all the oxygen had vanished from the room. Meredith Lawson chose to work additional shifts while her sick child remained at home. She disregarded her son's health issues. She put her professional life ahead of her own family. And now, she is consumed by her own guilt and is attempting to shift the blame. Eleanor's voice turned icy and severe. I will not stand by and let my son be ruined by this woman's personal failures. I am releasing these documents to the media, she declared. I am calling for a complete investigation into William Sterling's entire career as a prosecutor, and I am urging the citizens of Massachusetts to recognize this for what it truly is, a grieving mother's desperate attempt to avoid her own accountability. The press conference devolved into chaos. Journalists shouted questions, and camera flashes lit up the scene. Yet Eleanor remained poised in the center of the storm, appearing formidable and beyond reach. Meredith switched the television off. Is any of it true? She asked her father, her voice barely a whisper. About the Whitfield case? William remained silent for a very long period. When he finally spoke, his voice was faint. Thomas Whitfield was a guilty man. I am still certain of that. But the evidence that we presented to convict him... He shut his eyes. There were issues. Information should have been disclosed to his defense team. I convinced myself it was acceptable because I knew he was guilty. But now, Eleanor has the proof. Proof of what, exactly? I am not sure. But she has enough to make people question our motives, enough to make our entire effort seem like a personal vendetta instead of a quest for justice. The fallout was immediate and harsh. Garrett was let out on bail as the new claims were looked into. The district attorney's office suspended the case until the inquiry into William's history was finished. The news coverage shifted from Garrett's wrongdoing to William's. 3 days later, Meredith received a phone call. It was Richard Sullivan. I am incredibly sorry, Meredith, he said. We have to drop the charges. Our evidence is still solid, but with these allegations against your father, any jury will have a reasonable doubt. Eleanor's attorneys will argue this whole case was just a vindictive plot. Meredith shut her eyes. So, he gets away with it. Not for good, but we require fresh evidence. Something entirely separate from your father. Something that will render Eleanor's accusations irrelevant. That evening, Meredith sat in Lucas's vacant room one last time. She was now 7 months along in her pregnancy, and the baby was constantly kicking. It was a little life insisting on being acknowledged, even inside a home filled with sorrow. Her father was in the next room, recuperating from a heart attack, his reputation in ruins. Garrett was walking free. Eleanor had succeeded. Everything Meredith had struggled for had been reduced to nothing. She lifted Captain the Elephant, her son's most loved toy, and brought it close to her face. She inhaled the faint disappearing scent of her little boy. I do not know what to do now, my sweet boy, she whispered. They have stripped us of everything. They have won. Yet as she uttered those words, she felt a shift within her. It was not the baby. It was a feeling that was deeper and more powerful. They had taken her child. They had taken her career. They had taken her friends, her marriage, her father's well-being, and all of her hope. What was left for her to lose? She still had the truth. She still had her voice. And she possessed a fierce, angry refusal to be silenced. If the justice system would not help her, she was going to create her own path. Meredith uploaded her video to the internet at midnight on a Tuesday. She did not use professional gear or enlist a media expert. She simply sat in her son's room, 7 months pregnant, holding Captain the Elephant, and she spoke the truth. My name is Meredith Lawson. 3 months ago, my 5-year-old son passed away from a heart ailment while his father was spending time with his mistress. She talked for 23 minutes straight. She revealed everything: the 17 phone calls, the terminated insurance policy, the gambling debts, the forged signatures, and the 3 other women who had been with him before Sloan. She did not weep or beg for sympathy as she described Brooke's betrayal and Eleanor's plots to cover up her own father's past errors. She just laid out the cold, undeniable facts, one document after another, one date at a time, pulling back the curtain on one lie after another. "I am not looking for your pity," she stated, her gaze locked on the camera. "I am asking you to witness the truth. I want you to see what occurs when wealthy men are never held accountable, when powerful families can purchase silence, when the legal system fails to act." She held up Captain, the small, stuffed elephant that Lucas had cherished. "My son called out for his father just before he died," she went on, her voice unwavering. "His daddy did not show up. His daddy was in a hotel room with another woman. His daddy saw my calls coming in and made the choice to ignore them." She paused, gathering her strength with a deep breath. "If Garrett Lawson has ever harmed you, if Eleanor Lawson has ever paid you to stay quiet, if you possess any information at all, I am asking you to come forward. Do not do it for my sake, but for every woman who might come after me. Do it for every child who is entitled to a father who truly cares." She posted the video on every social media platform she knew of, and then she began to wait. By the following morning, her video had reached 200,000 views. By that afternoon, the video had been seen over 1 million times. Before the day was over, it was a story on the national news. In less than 48 hours, 4 other women found the courage to speak up. These were women Meredith did not know, women Eleanor had never considered. For years they had stayed quiet, convinced that no one would take them seriously. Soon there were 7 women, and then there were 12. People who used to work at Whitmore Capital started leaking company files. The documents showed that the company was fully aware of Garrett's behavior and had helped to cover it up. Reporters who had once been silenced by Eleanor's legal threats suddenly found their nerve again. Witnesses who had accepted money to stay silent decided that their conscience was worth more than the payout. The Federal Bureau of Investigation started an investigation into Eleanor's bank accounts overseas. The Internal Revenue Service began a thorough review of the Lawson family's financial records. The State Bar Association in Massachusetts launched an inquiry into the judges who had ruled in Garrett's favor. The district attorney found himself under intense public pressure and had no option but to bring back the charges. Richard Sullivan phoned Meredith with an update that made her feel like she might collapse. "We have enough evidence," he told her, "not just to go after Garrett, but to go after Eleanor as well. We are looking at obstruction of justice, bribery, money laundering, and tampering with witnesses," he explained. He paused for a beat. "This is going to trial." The trial lasted for 3 full weeks. Meredith spent a total of 6 hours on the witness stand over 2 days. She remained composed as she answered every single question the defense attorneys asked her. She did not lose her temper when they tried to paint her as emotionally unstable. She stayed calm when they suggested she had fabricated evidence. She just looked directly at the jury and told them what happened, simply and honestly. Sloan Whitmore gave his testimony. Nicole Brennan gave her testimony. 8 more women also took the stand. Former employees of Whitmore Capital also shared what they knew. The lawyers for the defense argued that Meredith was simply a heartbroken mother who was looking for revenge. The prosecutors countered that the proof against Garrett was overwhelming. On the final day, it took the jury just 4 hours to come to a verdict. They declared Garrett Lawson guilty of every single charge. The sentencing took place 2 weeks after that. Meredith was seated in the first row of the courtroom. Her father, who looked weak but was determined to be present, sat right next to her. She was now 8 months pregnant, and the baby kicking inside her was a constant reminder that life continues, even when you are living with loss. Judge Patricia Winters delivered the sentence. Mr. Lawson, you have been convicted of forgery, wire fraud, money laundering, and multiple counts of conspiracy to commit financial fraud. You have systematically deceived your wife, your own family, your colleagues, and the laws of this nation. Garrett simply stared down at the ground. His expensive suit looked rumpled, and his typical air of confidence had vanished. This court hereby sentences you to 12 years in a federal prison, which will be followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to repay every cent to the people you wronged. Your professional licenses are now permanently revoked. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a loud final sound. Eleanor Lawson was found guilty in her own trial and was given a sentence of 8 years, with the government seizing all of her assets. Meredith saw them both being escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She had thought she would feel a sense of triumph, or maybe satisfaction and closure, but all she felt was a deep sense of exhaustion, a heavy grief, and an emptiness she knew would likely never go away. Still, underneath all of that, she felt something that was almost like peace. 6 months after the trial, Meredith was standing in a small memorial garden just on the outskirts of Boston. The garden was funded by the settlement money from Whitmore Capital, which had paid millions to avoid a civil lawsuit it knew it would lose. Every last dollar of that money was used to create this place. It was designed to be a quiet refuge for families who had experienced the loss of a child. It served as a living tribute to the little boy whose passing had toppled a corrupt dynasty, the Lucas Sterling Lawson Memorial Garden. Spring had finally arrived, feeling gentle and full of hope after a very difficult winter. Flowers were beginning to bloom in beautiful, neat rows of tulips, daffodils, and crocuses, pushing up from the earth that still remembered the cold. A small fountain made a peaceful bubbling sound in the middle of the garden, and benches were set up for visitors to sit, to reflect, to mourn, and to find hope again. Meredith walked along a curved path toward a quiet spot where a small oak tree had been planted in Lucas's memory. The little tree was not much taller than her, and its fresh green leaves were just beginning to unfold in the mild air. She was holding her daughter in her arms. Charlotte was 3 months old. She had her father's dark hair and her grandmother's blue eyes, the exact same eyes that Lucas once had. Sometimes, looking at her felt like seeing a gentle ghost. She was a lovely reminder of everything Meredith had lost, but also of everything she still had. She knelt down on the soft lawn, taking care not to disturb the sleeping infant. She set a single white rose next to the brass marker at the base of the tree. The plaque said, "Lucas James Lawson, 5 years of joy, forever in our memories." "I wanted your little sister to meet you, my dear boy," she whispered softly. "Her name is Charlotte. I did not name her for anyone special. I wanted her to have a name that was all her own, one without any history or sadness attached to it." Charlotte started to move in her arms, making quiet, sleepy noises. Meredith rocked her gently. "Your grandpa is here with us, too. He is getting better, just moving a lot more slowly these days. He has to use a cane now, but he is still the same fighter he has always been. I suppose he will always be a fighter." She gazed up at the small tree, its tiny branches reaching toward the sunlight. "They are in prison now, both of them, your dad and your grandma. They will be there for many, many years. I am not sure if that makes everything okay. Nothing can ever really make this okay, but at least they can never harm another person again." She heard the sound of a footstep on the grass just behind her. She looked over her shoulder and saw William making his way toward her, leaning on his cane. He appeared older than his 68 years. The trial had taken a serious toll on him, and the heart attack had made him more frail. But he was here. He was alive and with her. "What a beautiful day," he said, as he slowly lowered himself onto the bench near the tree. "Yes, it is," she said. He sat there for a moment in silence, just looking at his daughter and his new granddaughter in the gentle afternoon light. "I got a call from the foundation this morning," he finally said. "They would like you to be a speaker at the national conference next month. They want you to tell your story to doctors, lawmakers, and other families. You could help them see what is really at stake when people lose their insurance." Meredith took a moment to think about it. 6 months earlier, she could not have pictured herself speaking about any of this in front of a crowd. Now she had already done it countless times. Her video had been viewed more than 40 million times. Her testimony had led to changes in the law. Her story had given other women the strength to speak out and had motivated other families to continue their own battles. "I will give it some thought," she said. "A reporter from the Boston Globe also called," he continued. "She is interested in writing a book about the case, telling the entire story of what we went through." "What was your answer?" Meredith asked. "I told her that the story is yours to tell, not mine." Meredith looked down at Charlotte, who had woken up and was gazing up at her with big, curious eyes. She was so tiny, so pure, with no idea of the turmoil that had preceded her birth. "Do you have any regrets about any of it?" William asked. "The fight, being in the public eye, everything that we lost." Meredith thought about his question, really considering it. "I regret that Lucas is gone," she said finally. "I regret that I did not realize who Garrett truly was a lot sooner. I regret that I ever put my trust in Brooke. I regret every single day that I will never get back with my son." She stopped for a moment, watching a butterfly drift past and settle on the rose she had left for Lucas. "But do I regret the fight, the attention? No, I do not regret that part. Lucas deserved so much more than a father who would let him die. The women Garrett harmed deserved a chance to be heard, and the families who come after us deserve to know what really happened." She got to her feet, still holding Charlotte, and looked at her father. "They were counting on my grief to destroy me. They believed their money and influence could keep me quiet. They assumed I was weak because I loved so deeply and trusted without question." A genuine smile, her first in a long time, appeared on her face. "They were very wrong." William rose from the bench and came to stand beside her. They stood together and looked at the little oak tree planted for Lucas, which was still small but growing, always stretching up toward the light. "So, what is next for us?" he asked. Meredith kissed Charlotte's forehead, breathing in the sweet, clean scent of her baby hair. "Now, we start living again. We remember Lucas. We raise Charlotte. And we help other families so they never have to face what we did." She turned and began to walk toward the exit of the garden, with her father at her side and her daughter held securely in her arms. The warm spring sun shone on her face, and birds were singing from the trees. Life was moving forward, as it always does, carrying the heavy burden of sadness and the bright promise of a new day. At the garden's edge, she paused to look back one final time at the small oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky. "I will never be completely healed," she said quietly. "That part of me will always be broken, but I am still here, and I made sure the man who let my son die will waste his best years in a prison cell, thinking about all the things he threw away." She drew a long, deep breath. "Some people might call that revenge. I call it justice." She stepped through the gates and into the sunlight, carrying her daughter toward whatever lay ahead. Behind her, Lucas's tree stood tall and strong against the brilliant spring sky. A gentle breeze made its leaves whisper, and with each day that passed, its roots stretched deeper and grew more powerful, just like the memory of his mother.